to just sit on our hands. We can't muddle through. That's not a strategy. We have got to do what you all have been talking about. And I'm very pleased and honored that Bruce has been handing out my book and bragging about my book, so I don't have to do so. But this is like a personal journey. This book. But there's 3 basic threads that run through. So number 1 is the companies be a powerful force for good, which is again what we're all talking about here. And when you can incorporate social and environmental strategies into your core business, you can do well by doing good. You can create value and wealth for your shareholders as well as for the rest of society. So that's one key thread in the book. Another key thread in this book is no matter where you are, I don't care where your career is, what your organization is, whether you're a newcomer, you're mid-career, you're retired, you can make a dent in the universe. You can actually do some social good. And then the third thread in the book is, and this is for Americans, but I guess it's really for North America. We have been given a great country. I didn't say a perfect country, I said a great country. And it's our job, it's our obligation to make it better and to pass it on. John and I have been talking about grandkids. We owe them. So the last chapter in the book is, what do we owe our grandchildren? That's what I try to do. Right after, not long after Trump pulled out of the Paris Accord, I was talking to Brian Wood, who is the CEO of Bank of America. Bank of America has been a long time partner of ours in Business for Impact at Georgetown. And I said, what do you think of this? And what do you think about the implications of it for climate action, for climate change? And he said, it ain't good. It's not good. He said, but he said, I actually have some confidence because I think the states and corporations are going to pick up the issue and make a difference. I think what we see today is how companies are making a difference. Associations of companies are making a difference. And I've got to say, that ain't enough either. We have got to have government as active as the rest of us. One of the things I think you learn, and I know Rick being a government relations guy at heart, one of the things we learn is that we can't really achieve all that we need to achieve without public support. We need to get the public behind all this. And so if you look at the infrastructure bill, there's a lot in there on climate action, but not enough. And if you look at the so-called Build Back Better bill, if it ever sees the light of day, there's a lot in there on climate action. But we have to do something about making that come to life as well. Now, you heard from Claudine, I'm a marketer. I'm not a technical person. So everybody here who reads Gilbert, you all know the disdain that engineers have for marketing. So I hope you don't feel disdainful towards me, but I'm a marketing guy, specifically marketing communications. And you heard a little bit about, next slide, please, Debbie. You heard a little bit about my career. I want to tell you about this light bulb moment. So I've had half my career in the private sector, in companies, and half in what I think of as public service. And I had a short stint as well in the government. And my business career was in Unilever. That's where I started. And I was working on exciting products. I hope I'm not going to offend anybody, like detergents and margarines and toothpastes and fabric softeners. And then this is in the Mad Men era. And then I went across town to a really hot New York advertising agency, Wells Rich Green. It was run by a woman, Mary Wells, who probably even today was the most successful woman in the history of advertising. And I was telling a story last night at dinner. Mary would do anything to advance her business. She even married a client. And this gave a whole new meaning to client service. And Wells Rich Green was a hot agency. And there I was working on kids' cereals, dog food, cat food, hair groom. So you can see that it was still packaged rich marketing. I was doing well. I mean, I had little kids making money, no heavy lifting, things were good. But as Claudine said, I had this problem. My problem was I would go home at night on the train to New Jersey. I would say to myself, what did I do today? I really can't find any social relevance in this. And so, to make a long story short, I joined the Peace Corps. I didn't go to Sierra Leone. I didn't go to Mozambique. I went to Washington.
What age were you then?
I don't know, maybe 26, something like that. I went to the Peace Corps, and my job was to help to market the Peace Corps. So these were the days when the Kennedy era was over, the Sergeant Shriver era was over. But these host countries, they still love the Peace Corps, just like they do today. But what they were saying is, hey, could we have fewer art history majors? Could we have some MBAs and some nurses and some physicians and people who understand agriculture? And by the way, could we have some people who look like us?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the job, to try to really reposition the Peace Corps. And I had a guy who had the same kind of background as me, marketing communications. And he and I said, we're going to start a company. We love the Peace Corps, but we weren't crazy about working inside government. And so we started a company.
That's Mr. Porter, right?
Zach Porter.
And he's 7 years older than you?
He's probably 8 or 9 years older. He's down in Florida walking his dog.
But the point being is you started being an enterpriser at the age of your 20s.
That's right.
I was already 10 years more.
29 years old at the time.
Okay.
So, but I got to tell you, I had a hiatus. I have to tell you about that in true honesty. So, our idea was we're going to start a company. This shows how naive we were, Rick. We were going to start a company to apply marketing communications to what Washington was all about. Now, what's Washington about? Health and social issues, right? Wrong. It wasn't about politics, it's about money, it's about sex.
And power.
But we thought we were naive, so we started this company, and we really pioneered in social marketing. And so we got hooked up with some academics who were studying, the theory of it. We were a bunch of soap salesmen, we were practitioners, we were working in social marketing, and we really kind of pioneered the field. But first I had a hiatus. And what happened was the White House found out that I had this marketing communications background. So they asked me if I would help to set up and run in-house advertising and promotion agency for the re-election of Richard Nixon. So I was not necessarily a political person. And I thought to myself, I had this light bulb moment. My light bulb moment is what Claudine basically said was, I got a new account at the ad agency. It wasn't kid cereal, it wasn't dog food, it was public television. This was the first time public television had ever hired an agency to try to build viewership. So the first thing I did was I went to a press conference. The press conference was being put on by a woman named Joan Gans Cooney. She stood up before the media, I'm sitting in the back of the room, and she said, I'm here to tell you that we're going to revolutionize children's education through television. And it was what? Sesame Street. Sesame Street. I'm sitting back there listening to this woman, and I said, she's an educator. She's really a true educator, but she's also a marketing person. So I had this moment, and I thought to myself, I can take marketing skills that I've learned in terms of detergents and kid cereals and whatever, and I can apply them to issues and causes. I can apply them to ideas. So that was my big idea.
Now, Bill, I hope you don't mind. I love the passage of your talk. Nixon, still with the Nixon administration at the
No, I had the aha moment before the Nixon administration.
Okay.
But the reason it was relevant was that I said to myself, okay, I'm not a political person. Here's a guy who's done a good job. He went to China. He did this and he did that. Maybe he does deserve a second term. So I thought to myself, I can apply marketing to political candidates. So I helped to set up and run the November Group, which was the in-house agency for the re-election of the president. We had a good team. We had a very good team. But stuff happened.
We've heard.
You heard. So we had our creative and our media people in New York. It didn't pay to move them all down to Washington for this campaign. So we had them up in New York. So I jumped on the shuttle one morning. I didn't see any newspapers. I went to New York, and here's our creative team. They're sitting at a table like this. And I went to sit down with them, and they said, wait a minute, what about this? And they threw the New York Times on the table. And it was Watergate breaking, G. Gordon Liddy, Jim McCord, blah, blah, blah. They said, this is the people we work with down there in Washington. It was known as the Committee for the Re-election of the President, or CREEP. Now, this tells you, be careful the acronym that comes out of naming their organization. Okay, so they said, do you think that these CREEP people know about this? Are they in on this? So I'm from Washington, right? I'm supposed to know something.
Uh-huh.
So I said, there's no way. I said, we're so far ahead in the polls, it would be stupid to do something like this. And they said, yeah, you're right. We were just wrong with the meeting. So long story, there's a lot about this in
the book. I really highly recommend you read the book. One of the, he's got that sense of humor in the book that you're just trying to figure out, is he going to be snookered by the tricky dick people? And you turn the page and he says, one of the things I've learned saying, I'm never going to forget that the rest of the
no thanks. So anyway, end of the campaign, November 1972, my partner Jack Porter and I started this company to apply marketing communications to health and social issues. And we built this company. We actually sold it. The company today is part of Omnicom, which is this giant marketing communications holding company. Porter Novelli today is worldwide, and it's successful. And it's got the same position essentially as we had back then, which is purpose. So how do you create purpose for organizations? I went on and I left Porter Novelli and I joined CARE. I had been on the board of CARE. And CARE is an international relief and development NGO, as you know. I basically oversaw CARE for 4.5 years, and I learned a lot. So we're talking about women's development. We're talking about agriculture. We're talking about micro lending. All these different things that go into development. Now, back in those days, corporations were not so strong in this area of international development. So we used to think of corporations like give us some money and get out of the way. Now, as we see, corporations, in my mind, are really the leading edge of international development. There's a lot to that. We can talk about that if you want.
Can I pause again to see if there's any questions from your gifted speakers so you're paying attention to the people sitting in front of you? Any questions from the people like Claudine or Gordon or Ken remotely or Bill at this point?
Nothing at this time because Bill has an awful lot of good kernels to share with us. So no, thank you. No questions.
Thanks. So I left CARE and I started the campaign for tobacco-free kids. So you got to understand that back in these days, kids smoking in the United States was at 38%. 38% of kids smoke.
Wow.
That was the bad news. The good news was that 38% of kids smoke, because it became clear that we had to do something about this. It was a problem worthy of attack. And the tobacco industry was big and it was bad. It still is big and bad, in my humble opinion. It had all these ad agencies, it had all these PR agencies, it had all these law firms under contract. It put a lot of money into to Congress, into state legislatures, and we had this big battle. And slowly over the years, and I now chair the board of the campaign for tobacco-free kids. Slowly, we brought smoking down. So right now, it's about 15% among American adults. It's about 5% on kids. Okay, but the lesson here is never let down your guard. Because now we have vaping.
Yes.
We have e-cigs. So we can talk about that later if you want to. But I worked hard on fighting the tobacco.
I have a question. That's because I'm fascinated in your book and your mind. You seem to me to have already had 3 lives in what you said so far, and you're only halfway through your life. So is it a fundamental curiosity that propels, or is it a fundamental physical restlessness?
Well, I think it's the former. I think everybody is curious. People who achieve, people like the people here and the people online, we're all curious. My favorite question is what's next?
Right.
What's next?
Okay.
When you're in a position, whether you're running a company, whether you're leading a team, whatever, you're asking yourself, where do I go from here? So I think what's next is a really important form of curiosity.
I think that's really important in terms of self-esteem and self-image as a psychic propulsion. Curiosity, care, which is eminent in your book, rather than restlessness. Because I would say that most of the CEOs I've served, fundamentally restless people. So the reason why they can cut through and kill so many projects, Bill, as opposed to have a social conscience, is that they're restless. They want to move on to 3 things an hour, and if it costs 10,000 in staff, they'll do it.
Well,
so it seems like for you, it's important for people to recognize that social conscience may come from curiosity of the other.
I think 3 things an hour is a disease. We all know we've got to take 1 thing, 2 things, 3 things, and stick with them. I think that's important.
That is important. Thank you.
I went to AARP. AARP is a remarkable organization. It's it's the biggest nonprofit in the country. And the thing about AARP is, not only does it have a powerful mission, but it has the resources to pursue that mission. So it's a great organization. And AARP had been a client in my Novelli days. So I knew their mission, knew what they were into. And I loved their mission. And the mission was enhance the quality of life for all as we age. So you have to think intergenerational. And if you do the research, as AARP does, you will see that older people in this country, what do they care about? They care about their kids and their grandkids. What do young people care about? It's hard to say, but essentially, young people care about their parents and their grandparents. So this intergenerational, this connection of the generations is so important. It's just one of the really driving forces of society. And I knew, besides the great mission, that the boomers were coming right into our sweet spot. And it didn't take a demographer to figure out that was a big marketing opportunity. And then the other thing was that the CEO was retiring, and I wanted to take his place. So to make a long story short, I fought for the job, I won it. I became the CEO of AARP.
And Bill, can I again, because I accepted every word of your book. So for those of you who are going to read the book now, one of the most important books published in the last 2 years, is when he becomes the CEO of AARP, he makes a statement about what was his North Star. And unlike most CEOs, who the North Star is profit, he has 3 subsets that I recommend you guys look for, which truly advances past all this gobbledygook about purpose in corporations. So look at what he says are the 3 emanations of his North Star. But I hope you get into it a little bit, because I
Well-
think you took a very established organization and made it better.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk here about corporate culture. And, we all know that old saying that Peter Drucker saying that, culture and strategy for breakfast every morning. And that's so true. And it's so hard to move a culture. I give myself a B- for moving the corporate culture at 8 years. But what I basically said was, I said, okay, we are going to be the most knowledge and successful organization in America with positive social impact. And we're going to help all of our members. At the time, there were 36 million members. I got it up to 40 million. I said, we're going to help them to make the most of life after 50. Now, how are you going to do that? And then the third thing is, AERP is going to be a leader in global aging. The whole world is aging. Rick and I were just talking about China. The whole world is aging very rapidly. In fact, your wife will appreciate this. I'm going to tell her. One day I found out that one of the oldest countries in the world was Italy. So I said, I'm going to call my senior team together and say, we're in danger of running out of Italians. We got to do something.
Bill knows my wife is American Sicilian.
So I ran AERP for 9.5 years. And we did go international. We had 5 million new members. And we had a great run. We were almost, I think I can truthfully say, instrumental in getting prescription drugs into Medicare. We did a lot of other things on the policy advocacy front. And we heard something about that this morning. We need to talk about policy advocacy. So I had a really good run at AARP. And one day this Washington Post reporter came to call me. He said, "You've been here a long time." He said, "What's next for you?" My favorite question. And I said to him what I've been thinking, but I never said anything with this. I said, "I'm going to go to a great university with a really good gym. And I'm going to teach and I'm going to audit anthropology courses. And I'm going to drink beer with students." So to make a long story short, I went to Georgetown. And Georgetown has a good gym. It's a great university. I've never drunk beer with students. I've never had time to audit any anthropology courses. So I teach in the MBA program. And I started a thing there called, today it's called Business for Impact. So it's a center. And I think I should go to the next slide.
Sure, let's go to the next slide.
Before I run out of time.
You're doing well. You have another 20, half an hour.
Oh, half an hour. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the essence of this center is, as I said earlier, business can be a powerful force for good. And it's about people, planet, profit, the so-called triple bottom line. And we have about 170 students from across the university, primarily MBAs, working on this stuff. About half of them are really deeply engaged. So they're doing strategy, they're doing presentations, they're doing planning, they're doing all kinds of interesting things. And so what we try to say to these students, and they understand this, is there's more than one bottom line. Now these are MBAs, these are capitalists. There's more than one bottom line. And you know what these MBAs want? They want the same thing I've always wanted. They really want purpose. And what they say is, one student said to me the best. What he said was, he said, "I got a lot of student debt. I got a nice job offer. I'm going to take that job offer." He said, I want to have a family. And I want to have a nice career. But I never want to lose my sense of purpose. So the way they say it in shorthand is purpose with a paycheck. And I like that.
Yep.
And we heard about that today. How do you retain? How do you keep the best, the talent that you need to succeed? purpose. And above all, we do partnerships. We do partnerships with companies. We do partnerships with nonprofits. We do partnership with government. And this partnership is, let's do something. Let's act. Let's try to make a difference. So it might be getting companies to hire and retain persons with disabilities. We just did a study for AB InBev, the big brewing company. So like 170 brands, 60 companies. These guys sell beer. But they also know that they have a license to operate. They have to really care about responsible drinking. So they put $1 billion into responsible drinking. And after 5 years, they asked us to take a look and see what we thought of the program and tell them where we thought they could do better. So that's an example of the kind of partnership. And Bruce and I have been working on this. We're hoping to do a partnership with BP. And we can talk about that later if you want.
And I would love people asking questions at this is because I know Bill well enough that I think it pays for pause to see if people have questions. Like, for example, I'm the nasty guy. I'll just leave. So you create this great thing called Part of Novelli. But still, you want to go to 2 more chapters in your life. Why didn't you just write out the wild horse for another 10 or 15 years? Why did you sell? You weren't even 50 years old.
No, I had a couple of reasons for it. But one reason was that we were successful. And we had, when we became part of Omnicom, we had this client list that would not quit. I mean, a client list as long as this room to cherry pick. The 2/3 of them are not companies or organizations that I necessarily wanted to work with. I just didn't see how to make progress.
Okay.
And I thought that, and I'd been on the board of CARE, as I said, and I thought, I'm going to go and work on international development.
So, in a way, it was never about money making.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, so that's why you could look at the list and say 2/3 of it, I don't, okay. Any other questions for this gentleman about major career transitions? So.
Claudine has a question.
Who?
Oh, sorry. Claudine?
Go ahead, Claudine, and then Dina.
Yes,
thank you.
Bill, you mentioned the importance of policy advocacy, but kind of moved right on beyond elaborating on that. I wonder if you could make a few additional points on the value of policy advocacy.
Thanks, Eileen. I'm going to talk about it. I think that if you look at what do we have in the toolbox, what tools do we have to make the kinds of change that we're all talking about? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But one of the key tools is policy advocacy, and it's hard for companies to really get involved in this because their instinct is, I don't need the government to tell me what to do. I don't need WHO to tell me what to do. I can create my own change within my own company, but policy advocacy is critically important. And so I'll just give you one little simple example. If you look at tobacco, one of the most important things in tobacco is if you raise the tax of tobacco, you'll get less of it. I mean, it's so obvious, right? So now we're talking about, should we be raising taxes on other things? And every company you talk to says, no, hell, that's going to decrease demand. But maybe that is a smart thing to do. And when Gord was talking about a carbon tax, that's an example. So policy advocacy is an important tool in the toolbox, and it needs to be considered.
And Dina.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Bill. Thanks for that overview. And
Yeah.
I wanted to raise the question with you that troubles me, maybe others on the call. This notion of purpose of an organization, I think it's thrown around way too loosely. And that lack of structure or solid framework, I think, is undermining this concept. So I wanted to hear from you, based on your experience, what do you think we should be watching for when companies say, my purpose, da 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 da?
Yeah, Dina, I agree with you.
Okay.
The easiest thing in the world is to say, hey, we're a corporation with purpose. And that's where a lot of that greenwashing comes from. Companies basically say, look, we got our values on the wall. And there's very little attention paid to that sort of thing. So when we talk about purpose, what we're talking about basically is and many of the companies here online that we're talking about, what we're talking about is incorporating environmental and social strategies into your core business. And if you can do that, that's the sweet spot. And that's where
That
purpose
resonates. Yeah.
Next slide, please, Debbie. So we've been talking about this for several days now. The business landscape has truly shifted. We all realize this. We've all been talking about it. And companies succeed today by balancing the needs of all of their stakeholders. And if you saw that slide, who was it? Richard Ellis, with all those stakeholders in that circle.
Yeah, that was yesterday in the private.
That's the kind of thing we're talking about. So you got to pay attention to all stakeholders. And we're talking about the evolution from CSR to ESG. You know, there's everything in between. There's shared value. There's nobody has yet to define sustainability. We love that word. That's a great word. Shared value, stakeholder capitalism, et cetera, et cetera. But what we're talking about here is how do we achieve long-term value? And that long-term value comes from, as I said before, incorporating social and environmental strategies into our core business. That's where I think it comes from.
What do you say to companies who've been achieving long-term value for 100+ years already? Is that same apply to them?
Yeah, it does, because if you look at BP as a perfect example, you know, Dominic said, okay, we've been in business since whatever it was, 100 years, 150 years, and now the writing is on the wall. We have to change. So yes, I think it does. Not always. I mean, maybe there's a business model out there that's permanent. I don't know. I haven't seen it.
What about Bank of America?
Oh, now Bank of America and all banks, I think, are changing. And you know, one reason they're changing is because of diversity. The thing we were talking about earlier today, diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're changing because their customers are changing. I don't think they have to change as rapidly as a BP does, or as you've done with your firm, but they are changing too.
Is there a question from our online audience?
So Bill, because you have a lot of value in your experience in the next few slides. So I've argued in my last 5 books that we don't understand capitalism. We might understand capital markets or how to make money, but that capitalism in its historic sense has always been social response capitalism. So while we're trained in MBA school to think about talent, distribution, and market, and technology, and the so-called things that allow you to make capital, Karl Marx was right in the sense that capitalism is a means of production, maximize social needs, address social needs. So I think that Americans in general, at least this is what I argued in 5 books, don't understand the purpose of capitalism. They think the purpose of capitalism is devoid of its neighborhood, that it's the purpose of capitalism is to make money. No, the purpose of capital markets is to make money. The purpose of corporations is to provide electricity, provide transportation, provide solutions to the aging, provide vaccines. Those are all social response capitalistic actions where technology and human talent is applied to a social need. And yet, in American system, you're viewed as a socialist. You even say, so when my books get translated into 10 different nations, the Japanese understand it, the Koreans understand it. They understand what I mean by social response capitalism. But in America, you're viewed as a socialist. If you actually talk about the difference between capital markets and corporations,
Corporations live in our neighborhood. They do good. That's why you could call your institute or your book good business. What do you think about that notion?
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think we got thrown off to a certain degree by Milton Friedman. We've all
Right.
right. So Friedman said the business of business is business, and the only thing you're supposed to do is make a profit. Now he's been maligned, I think, because what he meant was that if you make a profit, you create jobs, and you create more than jobs. You pay taxes, and so you are a responsible corporate citizen. But we got off the trail, and when I was in school, the whole thing was you're supposed to focus on profit. When I was at Unilever, if you read their annual report, it was like reading a P&L sheet. Not today. That's not what Unilever is today. We talked about Paul Coulson. So I think you're right, Bruce.
But I think the people that are attracted to this workshop kind of have that insight that you and I share implicitly, but not explicitly. See what I mean?
I agree. Debbie, next slide. So earlier I was talking about, we need public support. We need public support to create the big changes that we need to create. So let's look at where the public is. So this is a study from last year. And what we see in this study is trust in institutions is declining. Religious institutions, universities, nonprofits, government, worldwide. But trust in corporations is ticking up. Now, why is that? Well, it's because consumers think that corporations can do more, and that corporations can succeed where government and others have failed. So if you look at these findings, 75% of Americans think it's no longer acceptable for companies just to make money. They also have to impact society. 69% of Americans, this is just in the US now, 69% think they're less likely to support companies who are clearly in business just to make money. To win their support, 73% of Americans say companies have got to support communities and the environment. Now let me digress real quick and talk about a corporate partner of mine, the VF Corporation. I don't know how many of you are familiar with VF. So VF is the biggest company nobody ever heard of. And what they do is they manage the supply chain, and their brands market themselves. And their brands are Timberland, the North Face, Vans, Dickies, big brands, apparel and footwear. And they've got about 1 million workers. About 85 to 90% of them are women. But they're not really employees of VF. They're employees of contract factories in Bangladesh and in India, in Cambodia. I went to visit them in Vietnam and Cambodia, and also in Latin America. So what the VF company says is, and their CEO is really adamant, what he says is, we're going to treat these women as our own. Now, why are they going to do this? Say it's the right thing to do. Okay, that's good. Now, where's the business case? The business case is that they ask these women what they need. And these women say, I need more childcare. I need some help with childcare. I need clean water. I need eyeglasses. I need some protection against sexual harassment on the job. And then VF tries to give them these to the best they can by working with NGOs and UNICEF and others on the ground. A, it's the right thing to do. B, when they give these women what they want, it increases productivity. But C brings us back to this, which is young consumers, millennials, Gen Z, these consumers, they recognize what transparency is, and they can look it up. You can't slide it by it. They want to know that these women, these people who create these backpacks and these shoes and everything else are being treated fairly and honestly. So if they want to sell product, they basically have to do the right thing by these employees who are not even their own.
Couple quick questions from the group. So Timberland used to have an independent great reputation in sustainability. Is that why VF bought them?
I'm not sure why they bought it. But Timberland is a good example right now of VF doing what I just talked about. Excellent example.
Any other questions about VF?
72% of Americans feel more empowered to express their opinions with companies. Debbie, please. Where's Debbie?
So just step down.
Oh, okay.
Next slide, please.
There we go.
Whoops. Yeah, okay. So now we're at employees, what we were talking about earlier, diversity, et cetera, et cetera. I said that they increasingly want purpose as well as a paycheck. 86% of investors say companies need to work for the benefit of all stakeholders, not just their shareholders. And here's the key right here. There's an 87% correlation between purpose and reputation. Now, a lot of greenwashing can come from that. So the source of all this is the Novelli 2021 Purpose Premium Index. Now, next slide, please. You can go off the tracks. So being seen as irresponsible can be really costly. Entire industries can come under attack. The fossil fuel industry today. Bruce was talking about how much he loves Meta. You know, big social media platforms are coming under attack. Whole industries. You know, the media likes to cover controversy. So there's that old saying, you know, it's not a story if the plane lands. The media like to cover controversy. Negative stories can take on a life of their own. So VIA is still paying out for that emissions scandal. They just paid Ohio, I don't know, $5 million the other day. Wells Fargo is still trying to get over its internal scandals. You know, these stories take on a life of their own. Governments, there's nothing easier than for a government to be critical of a business or of an industry. I remember when Obama took on the pharmaceutical industry during the Affordable Care Act, and they were on his side, right? And then there's the CEOs. This is a precarious job to hold for a lot of different reasons. But one reason is during a crisis, the CEO has probably got to be the chief crisis communications officer. And not every CEO is good at that. And every CEO probably does think he or she is good at it. I know I shut my mouth off in my tough days at AERP after I used to counsel my clients, don't talk so much.
That's the bonus.
Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, crisis plans. We all have crisis plans. Mike Tyson, the heavyweight. Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until you get hit in the mouth. Yeah. Plans go off the track very fast. It's still important to do planning, but you have to be flexible. Apologies can backfire. So I have a friend, he and I work on crisis communications. He's got like a taxonomy of apologies. Right. So one apology is the classic Judeo-Christian apology, which is, we've done wrong. We're remorseful. We're going to make amends. We're going to do what it takes. You almost never see those apologies. Why? Because there's legal liability and because of pride. So that's the big apology out there. Another one is the so-called transactional apology. You often see this among celebrities. It's like, I'm sorry if you think what happened in that hotel room is not what I think happened in that hotel room, but here's $5 million. And then there's the non-apology. So you see this mostly, Boris Johnson, politicians and others. And then it's, I'm sorry that you're too stupid to understand this.
Exactly.
But I apologize. And then the last one is the marital apology. You see a lot of these, which is, I'm not sure what we're arguing about, honey. Let's just move on. And the idea here is the public's probably going to forget about it. And the public can have a short memory. There's a lot of criticisms. I'm going to talk about employee criticisms. Employee criticisms hurt the most. When your employees come after you, then you're really going to take it. Google had this. Facebook has had this with this whistleblower. She's been going all over the world. You need to keep your employees, your affinity groups in your company, your boards, and your close partners. You need to keep them close. So I'm going to give a really quick example. It's a small example, but it's important. Nike supports the Women's National Basketball Association. And the WNBA is really forward thinking when it comes to Me Too and Black Lives Matter. These things. Nike created jerseys for these teams, and on the back were these social messages. And the players didn't like the social messages, so here's Nike trying to do the right thing, and the players are criticizing the company. So it hurts when your own people come after you. The last person is.
So Bill, what's the fix for that? Right? Because
I'm going to talk about that.
Okay,
The fix is. I'll get to it.
okay,
The last thing is there's a lot of research that shows that consumers view companies like people. They think of a big company as like a person. They give it a persona. And they hold these companies responsible like they would hold their uncle responsible for bad behavior. It's a very interesting phenomenon that we have to pay attention to. Next slide. Okay, purpose statement is a promise. So BP has made a promise to the world. We're realizing energy for people on the planet, help the world reach net zero and improve people's lives. That's better be authentic, better be believable, it better be measured. Trust. Public wants trust. And they have what is sometimes called today purpose heroes. So Bernard Louis has the potential at BP to become a purpose hero.
I sent this to you, but you haven't had a chance to read it. The UK just did a survey of the top 3 CEOs in the UK. Bernard Looney's on the list.
Okay, there you
And
go.
he got there in 14 months.
Okay,
So just so you know,
okay.
I think he got a good example of that.
That's a good example. There are American CEOs as well who take on that aura. So they can be purpose heroes. The sweet spot I already talked about. But when it comes to the sweet spot, it's okay to be open about pursuing both social and financial success. You don't have to pretend like we're not in this for the money. Citigroup is doing this right now. They're running ads saying that we're going to invest in emerging markets. And we think we're going to do this not just to help people, but because there's money in it for us. Unilever is famous for this as well. Corporations have such assets. You all have such assets to apply. Nobody else has these assets, not government, not civil society. I'm talking about management skills, employee commitment, strong brands, suppliers, partners. So I want to give a quick example, CVS Health. If CVS Health decided that they couldn't be a health company, they were selling cigarettes. So they took cigarettes out of their stores and they took a $2 billion hit. And it took them like 5 years to recover from that. They reinvented the whole corporation. They bought Aetna, they got into insurance. They did all kinds of things. They redesigned their stores. And now the head of social responsibility for CVS, whose name is Eileen Boone, Eileen has said, I am the best recruiter at CVS. She said, the HR people love me. Everybody wants to come to CVS, truck drivers, pharmacists, you name it, because we're doing so much and we're recognized for it. I like to talk about 2 levels of change. You got to change at the macro level. You got to get people to understand that you're into normative change. And I think a lot of you are working on that right now. And that's what I think climate action is really about. An example is, a quick example is tobacco and obesity. So right now, it's not okay to smoke. But it's okay to be really seriously overweight in the United States. And we're doing a damn good job of exporting it to the rest of the world. We've got to change that social norm. decent. And then you got to get down at the same time, simultaneously. You got to get down to the community level where you're working through schools. You're working through these different kinds of partners that Dominic was talking about. You're working through all kinds of opportunities at the community level.
Bill, can we ask some abstract questions?
Sure.
So United Health, 200 billion, bigger than our client, Walgreens, Alliance Boots, bigger than CVS. Have you ever encountered them in terms of social purpose? Are you working with them? Because
United Health is our biggest and best partner.
Excellent to know. So they're beginning to look at tough issues like tobacco and obesity?
They've always looked at it. They have a big foundation that does good work. I don't think United Health is telling the story well.
I don't think so either. I mean, I just invested in them because they're 200 billion each, but
Yeah.
when I look at their stock dynamics, I mean, they're pretty stable. But I don't see their social mission. Yet what they're doing is your kind of stuff.
They don't tell the story as well as they need to.
Okay. Maybe we
I
work for them too.
Let's do it. Let's go to United Health.
Okay.
I'd like to talk about a social action model. You all know how to do planning. I'm not going to tell you about it. But, Richard Ellis was saying, what is success? What does it look like? So start by defining success and work your way from right to left, all the way back to where you need to start. And then you implement from left to right. That's the kind of planning I think we need to do in terms of telling our stories and doing it well. So I'm doing a lot of work right now with a really, I think, impressive committee. The American Association for the Advancement of Science is key in this. Research America is key in this. All kinds of notable people in the committee. And the objective is to try to get the United States to double its science and technology budget as a percent of GDP over the next 5 years. And if we can do this, we're going to make a huge difference. And so the idea is to start over with the vision. And the vision is to get the public and everybody else to understand that science is seen as essential to our national well-being. People don't have to understand science. They have to believe in it. They have to support it.
It's also essential to our national security.
Yeah, that's a key part of it. Okay, next slide.
So tell us again, those two big groups you're working with, this doubling the science and tech budget.
Well, the American Association for the Advancement of Science is a big part of this. Research America is a big part of it.
Gotcha.
And then there are a bunch of notables, former heads of NIH, all kinds of.
One of the guys on our board is from Research America. So medical consortium.
Yes, right.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's very good.
So you're working with Research America, American Association.
AAAS, and others.
Got it.
I'll tell you about it. Okay, now we get to policy advocacy. This, I said before, is important, and I hope we'll get a chance to maybe talk about it. But the next thing is we've got to be consistent with our communications, both internally and externally. Too many companies, in my experience, jump around. They try one thing, it doesn't seem to work. They have this thing I call client wearing, which is the board and the senior management get tired of a story before anybody else does, so they want something else. I call it client wearing. In order to be really good at communications, you need to develop key insights. That's what good consumer research is all about. So I hope I have time for this. I want to give.
You do.
Okay.
There's only 3 presentations. You have another 10, 15 minutes.
All right. I want to give 2 examples of key insights. So one from the commercial world and one from the social world. So back when I put in the early days, we had a sister ad agency used to track attitudes, interests, and opinions, psychographic research. And one of the key questions that we tracked over about 6 or 7 years was, do you agree or disagree? I would do better than average in a barroom fight. Okay? And over time, the percentage of men who said, yes, I agree with that, is going down. And the percentage of women who said, I would do better than average in a barroom fight, is going up.
Interesting.
The lines never cross, but they were coming close. And so the question was, do you think you do better than energy point trade? Then you can put it, okay, I like that. So, let's not just try. Let's not just try. So correlate. What's a correlate? What consumer behavior?
Confidence.
Pardon?
Confidence.
Yeah, but what consumer behavior? Yeah, drinking. It correlates with beer drinking. So there's an insight that you can host, right? You can go to TV spot. You don't have to show a woman beat somebody at a bar, but you can show that confidence, the confidence that you're talking. Okay, now here's one from the social world. So has anybody ever heard of the Truth Initiative? Yeah. All right, here's the deal. Back in the earlier days, 15 years ago, nobody could come up with an effective appeal to get kids not to experiment with tobacco. So the story was, don't smoke, it'll kill you. Kids said, oh, let me try that. Then it was, don't smoke, your breath will smell, you'll never get it. Kids said, we're all smoking. But it doesn't make any difference. And so they kept after these appeals and they were never finding it. And finally they came up with a really brilliant. And the really brilliant appeal, this came out of Florida. And the really brilliant appeal was, kids like to rebel. We all know this, right? Kids like to rebel. So they rebel against their mothers. They rebel against their coaches, their teachers, their rabbis, you name it. They rebel against them. What if we could get kids to rebel against those bastards who are selling cigarettes? They can be replacement smokers for the next generation. So you set up this Truth Initiative to take on the tobacco industry. And then the TV spots like, they were putting body bags in front of the Philip Morris headquarters. I don't know if anybody remembers. There was this conference in San Francisco where Philip Morris changed its name to Altria.
Yeah.
Very sneaky, right? So he changed it to Altria. So
work with me. Never.
never. So these kids put 2 pounds of manure in front of the conference. And one said, Philip Morris, and then the sign that said Ultra, and the other sign said, same old shit. Some kids are. They're villains. So this campaign was really effective. Okay. And now, life has changed. Now kids aren't so oriented in that direction. Kid smoking is down, vaping is the big issue, e-cigarettes. So they've done a lot of really good research. The Truth Initiative has done a lot of good research.
So Bill, I read the numbers. 38% they used to be smoking. Some said 25%, roughly. No, 5%. Kids. From that 38% to the 5%, did the Truth Initiative become the major pivot message?
Yes, it was a key. Yes.
You measured that.
Yes, it was very measurable and it was tracked carefully. But now things have changed. So now what we have is vaping, like 25% of all kids have vaped in the last 30 days.
Really?
I mean, it's overdue. And these are suburban kids. I mean, this is really an amazing phenomenon. So they did this research, and what they found was that the key issue today for children, for adolescents, is what? What do they care about the most? What are they most concerned about?
Videos.
That's always been the case.
Yeah.
Acceptance. Acceptance.
That's always been the case. Yeah. What they're really concerned about today is mental health.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Suicide ideation is up. Kids are all freaked out about being remote, not being able to go to school. They spend time in their rooms. Mental health is a big issue. So we developed a whole campaign around vaping and mental health. And the depression. And I'm not sure they've proven this, but they claim that vaping is tied to depression. They got a big campaign around this. And we don't see it because it's aimed at kids. But the thing is that early indications are that the campaign is working.
Well, what I like
said
about
has the campaign.
So
Who has the campaign?
the Truth Initiative.
Oh, okay. So okay.
Yeah.
and what I like about the truth, I'm sorry, did you want to?
No, that yeah.
What I like about the approach is from a cognitive science point of view, the Truth Initiative, you're capitalizing on the innate rebelliousness of youth, as opposed to trying to institute a shame culture or a guilt culture.
Yeah.
Because the priests are not, or the rabbis are not going to succeed in telling his kids don't smoke.
Yeah.
It's the rebellion of it. And that was really interesting.
Yeah.
How do we do that for climate change?
See, I don't know. We got to think about that. We need insights. We need those insights.
Right.
We got to get the public to really support all the stuff that you all are doing.
Yeah.
Okay, strategic storytelling. You know, I'm big on storytelling. But if you listen to stories on public radio, you go to a conference, you listen to stories, so many of them are just like, you know, get you warmed up, make you feel good. They're not strategic. You need strategic storytelling. So here are three categories. One is the Genesis story. Where did we come from? Why are we here? So one of my favorite Genesis stories is from my AERP days. The woman who started AERP, her name was Ethel Percy Andrews. She was the first female principal in the state of California. She retired and she went to visit a friend, a fellow educator, and she found this woman living in a chicken coop. And Ethel got mad. She got organized. Because in those days, teachers had virtually no pensions. They had zero health insurance. So Ethel worked for 7 years. They did a company to support this idea of selling health insurance to retired educators. So she started the Retired Teachers Association, and from that evolved AARP. And Ethel Percy Andrews, everybody at AARP calls her Ethel. Nobody's ever met her. She died, 30 years ago. They all call her Ethel. And Ethel had this saying, which is just as powerful today as it was back then. And she talks about an army of useful citizens. That's what she calls volunteers. And she said, our motto is to serve, not to be served. Okay, that's a Genesis story. And then there was a resurrection story. Charles de Gaulle said, France was humiliated by the Germans. World War II. We needed a resurrection story in order to survive as a people. We worked on it. Now, BP is telling a resurrection story. ExxonMobil is telling it. Total is telling it. These resurrection stories, they have to be believable. They have to be based on insights. They have to be strong. And then there's a third category that I like to think about. I call them turnaround strategies. So this is a small example, but when I was joining the board of the Association of American Medical Colleges, I was the only non-doc on this board. I didn't like the board. And so the day I joined the board, they called me up and they said, a mid-level bookkeeper has embezzled $5 million. We have to make the announcement, and our members are going to be mad. And we're going to be embarrassed before the public. What should we do? So I remember back to my care days, and I said, do you have an internal audit function within your organization? And they said, no. I said, okay, start one right now. Whenever you tell the story, say that this is never going to happen again. Because now we started an internal audit function. I mean, I kind of made it up on the spur of the moment, and they did it. And it's an example of a turnaround. Why is this not going to happen again? That's a turnaround story. And then we want to, we talked about this a lot. We really have to focus on corporate culture. There's been some great examples that have been given. And one of the things I like to think about is, BP talks about how their employees are disillusioned. I mean, they fired, what was it, 30,000, 20,000?
Well, it wasn't 70 to 60.
Okay, they fired 10,000.
It was a large percentage.
Okay, others have done this as well. I mean, that'll put a hole in your morale.
Yeah.
So they have to come to grips with this. And one of the things they told us was, they said, a lot of our people don't want to work on the rail anymore. They want to work on the leg. They want something sexy. And so you got all these morale issues. And you got to work on this and make it work. And of course, it comes from the top. But I have this idea that employees need to be ambassadors. They need to be ambassadors for what you're trying to achieve. Ambassadors for the transformation. Next slide, please. I just want to cover one more quick thing, which is on a lot of people's minds these days, which is companies speaking out. Okay, so earlier I said that research shows that the public wants companies to stand up on issues. And the public thinks that they can influence companies in terms of the stances that they take. And oftentimes these issues are just dynamite. They're very political, they're very controversial. Gay rights, voting laws, immigration, climate, COVID protocols. I mean, we politicized everything. Kneeling before the kickoff was political. Racial equity, Me Too. These are all highly controversial issues. Should companies stand up and take a stance on these issues? Well, I said the public, especially younger people, they want to hear from companies. They want to know that the companies are going to speak out. Now, we're Fortune 500 CEOs. They're exactly split. 50% say, yeah, we do need to speak out. We have a responsibility. And 50% say, no, we're going to stay away from this. Let's keep a low profile. Let's stick to our knitting.
I think that's still the legacy of Milton Friedman 51 years later. Everything.
So I talked earlier about CVS Health.
Just a question on that. How do you see it as the company speaking out versus, say, the CEO personally speaking out?
I think it's very hard to differentiate. So you remember when Starbucks, what was that guy's, what's the guy's name who was the CEO of Starbucks? Schultz. Howard Schultz. Yeah. Howard Schultz says, when I guess it was George Floyd was killed, Howard Schultz says, okay, every barista in the country is going to initiate a conversation on racial equity. That lasted about 9 minutes. Nobody wants to hear from a barista on social equity. But it was a Starbucks idea, the public thought. It was really Schultz. It's very hard to differentiate, I think, between the two.
And Bill, Mark Steinman comes from Ken Frazier's Merck, where Ken, for the last 8-9 years, stood out exceptional as a CEO speaking out on social issues.
Yeah, I think.
But very often it was him. He
was
didn't come out and say Merck believes this. He said, I believe this.
Right.
And when he resigned from
Trump's
Yeah.
committee there.
Right.
Mark, did it work?
He did.
Yeah.
You didn't track it anyway, did you?
What's that?
You didn't track it to see if there were people thought it was Merck speaking out?
Whether they saw it as Merck or Ken speaking out, I don't know.
Probably had to be because he was African American. He was so visible.
But it's also just his nature in that he wouldn't want to presume. I remember when I met him on Wall Street, he talked about how when I was at Cornell and preppy school, he was at Penn State selling guppies to make money.
Yep.
I mean, everything that comes from his voice is authentically self-made. So I don't think he would presume to talk on behalf of me. But he could, of course. Mm-hmm. But that's actually a competitive advantage because if things go wrong, it's Ken Frazier, right? Mm-hmm. But people believe it because it's Ken Frazier. You know what I mean? So I actually think the CEOs that are stepping out and taking on these social issues like racism or the underprivileged or social needs, it should be in their voice because it has to be authentic. It can't be their PR people writing the speech. I mean, when Ken speaks, you feel it. Right? Yeah. For 10, and you look at the stock during the 10 years he was in charge, phenomenal. And in contrast to your 6 peer group.
You're right. He's not scripted.
He's not
scripted.
He
speaks from the heart.
It's authentic.
It's obvious.
It's authentic.
He will be unique.
Well, I think more have the model after that.
So two quick examples.
Yeah.
Delta Airlines. Whenever Georgia passed that voter, whatever you want to call it, voter restriction law, they checked with Delta first. And Delta said, yeah, we're okay with this. Then they passed the law, and all hell broke loose. So then Delta said, no, we're not okay. Delta looked really bad. Another example was CVS Health. I spoke about them earlier. So in this past Sunday's New York Times, there was a big interview with the new CEO of CVS Health. she came up through Aetna. Now she takes over. She's been on the job 3 months. I don't know what. And so they said to her, "Are you going to speak out on key issues?" She said this in 2 paragraphs. The answer was no. He doesn't intend to speak out at all on key issues.
So Bill, you guys with the trend, so it's 50-50 right now. Half are afraid.
Yeah.
And half
Well, I don't know if you want to call it afraid.
I'll call it afraid.
Okay.
So, and
Well,
half
I
said,
have
yeah.
a question. So Bill, you mentioned that the employees need to be ambassadors. And I feel very strongly about that. And a number of years ago, EPA sponsored a voluntary program for corporations to reduce their greenhouse gases. And I had proposed to EPA that it's great once we get the CEOs and the board to agree to reduce their 6 greenhouse gases. But I proposed that EPA then do a communications program within the corporations to help them reach their employees so that they could be ambassadors. And they said, "Oh, we'll think about it. We'll think about it." Well, I went into some of the corporations that I enlisted, like Staples, and I said to the guy, the manager, I said, "Congratulations for being a climate leader." And he looked at me as though I came from Mars. And I did the same thing at Target. And it could make such a huge difference if more corporations embrace the culture that they're trying to communicate throughout the corporation and enlist their employees with that kind of buy-in. So do you have any programs or, instructions on how to get corporate leaders to enlist employee buy-in in the corporate culture?
Yeah, I don't think I have a magic formula, but I would say this. It's very hard to come up with a single idea, like getting them to embrace that one concept. This takes years. In other words, a corporate culture is a living, breathing thing, and it takes a long time to establish it. And then when something goes off the tracks, like BP right now, it's hard to get it back on the tracks. So it's very hard to say, okay, we're going to be for X. Let's get all of our employees to buy in. Then they're going to be ambassadors for X. What it takes basically is continuity. And it takes team building. And you can't just do this, at the top and expect it to filter down. And one of the things I talk about in the book, I learned this from Colin Powell. He was one of my heroes. I find Colin Powell to be a hero. And one of the things he used to say is, you can lead from the middle. You don't have to be the CEO. You don't have to be in the C-suite to be a leader. You can lead from the middle. If you're going to establish the kind of thing that Claudine was talking about, it takes time. And it takes education. It takes transformation. And then you can develop ambassadors. So it's going to be very hard for BP to create ambassadors overnight.
That's a great metaphor for how social history changes.
And
We
Bill,
think of the great heroes like Desmond Tutu or Nelson Mandela, or I could say another 10 in social history. They led from the middle. I mean, Nelson Mandela's in prison for 22 of the years he's leading. Desmond Tutu, before he's appointed chair of the Truth and Reconciliation, he's running a church. Right? They're not designated, but they assume leadership from the middle. I think that's a great point.
Bill, you had mentioned the topic of culture now 3 or 4 times. That's hard to understand for a lot of organizations. Do you have a framework for how you would define a corporate culture, or an understanding that you could share in terms of what are the determinants of one?
Well, there's a huge literature on corporate culture, but it really comes down to there's I don't want to call it a cliche, but there's a very simple saying: the way we do things around here.
Yeah.
That's corporate culture,
right?
And you can't put out a memo. You can try to change. You can bring in new blood and mix it with the old blood and try to influence culture that way. Another important thing is that I've always found, and I think the literature supports this, is You know, have a big goal. Have a goal that somebody can believe. Have a goal that people can believe in. And then the third thing is, you know, to use a football phrase, put some points on the board.
Well said.
In other words, if you kick a field goal, celebrate it.
Exactly.
So that people understand that people make change.
I think it's relevant to the conversation. A framework that I've always used is what does the organization believe? What does it value? And how does it act?
Yeah, that's
And
right.
also the power of putting a few points
Yeah, but you know what?
in anchor the change.
As I said earlier, you know, if you put your corporate values on the wall, so if somebody comes into the, you know, the lobby of the building and there's your corporate values, you got to live them.
Oh,
They just can't be on the wall.
Hey, Bill, I see that Ken Strassner has a question. Ken, are you still there?
Still here. Bill, how would you advise a CEO of a company trying to effectively manage its social issues about which public policy issues they should comment on and which they shouldn't?
Well, I'm going to go to that right now, if I may, Ken. Can I change slides? So, Ken, here's what I think we need to do. Whoops. Go back one. Okay, Ken, if you can hear me, here's how I think you need to do it. And this is tricky terrain. I'm not saying this is easy. Number one, as I said before, adhere to your corporate values. And they just can't be artificial. They just can't be, you know, platitudes on the wall. And try to apply a social value lens, a social impact lens, the kind of things that you all have been talking about. And then the second thing, Ken, is test constantly. Test your positions, your messages, your messengers with internal and external audiences. Now, people say to themselves, well, that's a 6-month effort. No, I'm talking about 6 days. You know, quickie testing, just to get a kind of an appeal for it. So constantly test messages. The next thing is to monitor. You got to have antenna. You got to have antenna out there. So monitor your relevant stakeholders, and don't be caught off guard. I mentioned Delta Airlines. You know, they were caught off guard because they really weren't monitoring these key issues with their relevant stakeholders. The next thing is, don't try to be all things to all people. Don't try to pronounce on every issue. But you've got to be ready to comment on the relevant ones because the media may knock at your door. And I always talk about setting the record straight. This is, in my view, a principle that needs to be adhered to. So somebody calls you and they say, Julie, tomorrow we're going to come up with a big story on X, and your company is implicated in that story. What do you think? She says, well, gee, I haven't talked to anybody. No comment. Don't do that. You got to be ready. You got to have some comment because after that story runs, you're not ready to. But then after that, if they got you wrong, or if they maligned you, or they misunderstood you, you got to call them back. You got to set the record straight. They never let the record, you know, today, a record can live on into infinity. Never let it go on. Set the record straight. And then, as I said before, keep your employees, your affinity groups, your partners, keep them close. So that's my recommendation on what to do about speaking up.
Well, I think John Winters has a question for you. John.
Hey, John, why don't you introduce yourself not only as former AHC group, but as what you did before I found you and what you.
So I'm going to come back to you to make sure I get your answer and respond to you.
You said okay.
Okay.
So, Mr. John Winter, please introduce yourself.
Hello, all. I'm John Winter. I known Bruce for, maybe 20 years or so. I used to be the CSR director at, now called Cura Green Mountain, then called Green Mountain Coffee Roasters. And I was the first to have that job when it really wasn't a job anywhere else. So we learned kind of the hard way by hard knocks. And at that point, it was called global warming, and we tried, started to do a few things at the company, both internally and around our energy use, and with coffee growers around the world. And having kind of seen the issue of climate change, kind of evolve, I guess my question, Bill, is, from your long experience in public relations and elsewhere, the messaging around climate change seems to have been evolving from kind of, first, do we agree that there is climate change? And it seems like at this point we kind of have. It does exist. Second, have people caused it? Is this a human, based, challenge? And then the third, and probably the most important one, what should we be doing about it? What can an individual do about it? And it seems like that messaging seems to have been a bit muddled. And I'm wondering if you might have any suggestions about how that might be done better.
Thanks, John. And John, I have to ask you a question first.
Yeah.
Did you come to Georgetown to speak about your company?
I spoke at a lot of schools. Maybe. I might have. I don't remember Georgetown directly, but that was one of the things that I did a lot of.
So Green Mountain Cure came to Georgetown to speak to this MBA group. And so maybe it was you, John, I don't know, they gave a great talk. And they said, okay, questions. And the first question was, those little cups there, are those biodegradable? And John, the answer was like a 5-minute answer. And then
well, I can tell you, Bill, that my downfall at that company was the K cup. We had lots of ideas on how to make it better, but 20 years later, it's still not been fixed. And now there's billions of those things in the waste stream.
Yeah. So finally, the guy who was giving the talk, I thought it was a CEO, finally goes up and he said, we're working on it. And now they've replaced all the machines, all those cured machines in Georgetown are all changed. And they got these machines with these little pods that you put in. They got rid of the K-cups. And those are the
How much of academic ground this conversation?
No, but that he never heard from that. So he said, what can we do about climate change? And it brings us back, I think we spent 1% of our time on the public in this discussion over the last several days.
That's a good point.
We got to get the public engaged. We got to get the public to do something. Because that's the only way we're going to get the public support that we need to support all of this other stuff that we're talking about.
That's why we want Ed Maybach to commit to speaking.
I'll get him to come.
Yeah.
So this guy Ed Maybach that Bruce is talking about, he's been doing a lot of consumer research. And what he's seen is that, now Europe's ahead of the US. In Europe, there's much more consciousness about climate action than there is here. Right? Am I right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, but in this country, there is change. But like everything else, it's politicized as hell. And so you can see distinct differences between Democrats, independents, and Republicans on whether they believe this is real, whether they believe it's man-made, what they think should be done about it. There's real differences.
He has a 15-year data set on the discriminating segments that
Well, we were talking about this at dinner last night. So I ran into this guy who's been doing some really interesting media work, media messages, primarily advertising. And he's aiming at what he calls movable women. Now, what is a movable woman?
not my wife.
Not you. That's the headline.
Strong.
A movable woman in this guy's lexicon is a woman with a college degree who's primarily independent and is willing to swing in terms of how she votes on the basis of key issues. And these women are willing to be moved by good climate change messages.
That's important.
And he has a campaign built around science moms, scientist moms, women who are mothers, who are scientists, And he has been able to show that he can move the needle on this.
Something should take root there for sure.
We need to do something like that on a broader scale. We need to do something about getting the public more involved. Maybe it doesn't make a damn bit of difference if they stop using K-cups, or if they start recycling or whatever. But it changes attitudes, changes awareness. And so I think that we need to spend more time on that.
Well, I can give you a little anecdotal experience in that I moved to Colorado so that I could work with the scientists on climate change and really frame a message about the validity of science, et cetera. And then I realized, no, that's not the message. It needs to be an economic message. And even that needed to be refined further. And it wasn't until I got a bill, an electric bill from Xcel Energy, showing a man who was very excited that he was only paying $32 a month instead of $165 a month for electricity because he put solar on his roof, and he was happy to be part of the solution of addressing climate change. So it had to come down to the individual consumer benefiting. What is the return on investment for me to do this? Well, I save money and I'm saving the environment, and I feel good when I go to sleep at night. So that's been a very effective message that I personally have been working with.
I think that's a good example of an insight that we can apply. Not everybody responds to economic incentives. Respond to other things. But I bet there's a large category of people we could reach with that message.
So, Gord, you'll be the last comment to stay on top. Okay, Gord, please.
Oh, just to say, what do you think engages folks better in that ground game of change on climate? Is it negative messaging or positive? You know, because negative messaging's really been a dominant narrative. It's avoidance of catastrophic consequences. It reminds me of a company having a vision statement of avoidance of bankruptcy versus a positive one, which is, any reflections on that?
Well, we know that negative messages work well, primarily in political campaigns, primarily in the last 6 or 8 days. I don't think negative messages are going to work so well here. But I don't think we should guess. I think we need to do our homework. We need to find insights like whether it's an economic message, whether it's a science mom talking about her kids. You know, what is the message that's going to appeal? And it's not going to be the same for all segments.
Hey, Bill, thanks for being our friend.